I am so grateful that you're all here tonight under this beautiful full moon, and thank you very much for coming out, coming here. And I want to say something very personal before I start saying more personal things. I'm really happy to be allowed to be a foreign-born woman of African descent today to say what I want to say, and I'm going to do that today. So thank you all for being here with me. Thank you, British Museum. Now, the Supremes. Number one, and I'm not joking, Professor Olivette Otele, former professor of history at Bath Spa University and vice president of the Royal Historical Society. She has just been appointed to a new post as professor of the history of slavery at Bristol University starting this month. She is an expert on the links between history, memory, and geopolitics in relation to French and British colonial past. She charts and analyzes the way in which Britain and France have been addressing questions of citizenship, race, and identity through the politics of remembrance. She also considers the value of public gestures, the meaning of public history, and the impact of cultural memory. And she is the first Black woman to be appointed to a professorial chair in the history of the United Kingdom, Professor Dr. Olivette Otele. Yes, ma'am. How is it? Supreme number two, Dr. Miranda Lowe, principal curator and museum scientist at the Natural History Museum, London. With over 2 decades worth of collections, management, and cultural skills, Dr. Lowe cares for a plethora of historically important specimens from both the Challenger and Discovery oceanic expeditions. Since her year-long secondment in 2006 to learn about exhibitions and gallery interpretation in a museum environment, she has been exploring her passion for the role museum exhibitions play in our understanding of the natural world. As a volunteer STEM, and you all know what STEM means, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics ambassador and communicator of science, she does outreach work in schools and behind the scenes at the Natural History Museum, London. She mentors students as part of the Social Mobility Foundation Aspiring Professional Scheme and the Prince's Trust. In 2013, Dr. Lowe was one of 3 finalists for the National Diversity Awards Positive Role Model Award for Race, Religion, and Faith, receiving a certificate of excellence for her achievement. She's one of the founders also of Museum Detox, and she was born in South London. Dr. Miranda Lowe. Hello, darling. And Supreme, the last Supreme but not the least, Dr. Valika Smeulders, curator of the forthcoming exhibition on slavery, opening at the Rijksmuseum, Amsterdam in 2020. This is going to be a groundbreaking exhibition. Dr. Smulders specializes in social diversity, heritage, museums, and the slavery past, and has written on these topics in the Netherlands, the Dutch Caribbean, Ghana, and South Africa. She works with heritage institutions, universities, and community organizations on new heritage presentations and reaching new audiences in The Hague. As a researcher for the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, She researches the Dutch Caribbean diaspora in the Netherlands and new definitions of heritage. And when I met her at the Rijksmuseum a couple of months ago, she was telling them about maroon culture because people need to know about that. Our last Supreme, Dr. Valika Smeulders. Okay, everybody, this is going to be really uncomplicated. This is going to be a conversation. You may hear some stuff you don't like. You may hear some stuff you disagree with. But what we want to do tonight is make this a space that you can listen to, that you feel safe in, and that you can speak. Everybody is speaking for themselves. They're not speaking on behalf of anything or anybody but themselves. And that's what tonight is about. And after we speak for a little bit, then I'm going to open it up for you. And you can ask questions or react or whatever. So I've only got 3 questions. And no, honestly, because, you know, life is short. Okay. I'm going to ask each of you, and people, and whoever can start, but you all got to answer. What is diversity? And what does it mean to you?
I can
Miranda.
start. I'm raring to go. Before I say what I think it is or what it is to me, it should be for institutions that think they're diverse or want to become more diverse. It should be more than a declaration. It should be an actual demonstration. So that's really important. What it means to me that you are reflecting either the communities you're within, the country that you're in, those diverse communities should be represented within your the context of your galleries and what you display as much as possible, showing them information about themselves. They want to see things about themselves and their culture. There should also be, in terms of diversity, representation and diverse communities within museums and cultural institutions that on their staff. There's a lot about this at the moment, and that's one of the reasons why we're here, that diversity is key to everything. More productivity within institutions, better collaborations, and you're seen outside of walls such as the British Museum or the Natural History Museum where I work. You will be seen in a better light if you reflect what is going on outside around you.
Thank you. Yes. Who?
Okay,
Yes,
that's, yeah, okay. I'm coming from a French background, so it's going to be a bit blunt. When somebody says diversity, for me, it means less racist. So we want to be diverse, it means you are racist and you want to appear to be less racist. So you're going to hire somebody, and it's going to be that one person who's going to carry the load, do the emotional labor, and yeah. Sorry.
I like that.
No, that was good. Chapeau. Velika.
Well, I'm from the Netherlands, so it's different where I'm from. Actually, I was surprised. I've been freelancing for a few years. And when I started at these 2 institutions where I'm now working, people started by saying, I was there like Alice in Wonderland, the only black woman over there. And people, when I talked about diversity, were telling me, but we are really diverse. And I didn't understand until I understood that they meant that there were a lot of women there, but not women of color. So what I've learned in these last few years is that it's really important once you start to diversify that it's a verb, it's about the work. Whenever you are in an institution and a certain group is not there, you are unaware of what's important to that group. So once they start coming in, you need to change yourself, look at yourself from a different angle, from the angle that the new group is bringing in. And then you are diversifying, then you are changing. But I promise that it'll be completely different from what it was before. And I think that's when we've done a good job.
Well, let me ask the three of you, what's the difference between diversity and the diversity business? I'll ask all of you that too as well.
I can start again. The diversity business is currently a big business.
What is it? What is it? What's the difference between that and diversity?
Well, it kind of links back to my first sort of line, was it should be more than a declaration, it should be a demonstration. So at the moment, the way I see it, a lot of it is a declaration. It's good for business. There needs to be, and so the difference is there needs to be action and a demonstration and an understanding as well. It's not just putting that you become diverse if you have someone like me. You've also got to change the culture within. Like Olivette was talking about, being less racist. It's not easy being one of a few within any kind of institution. You've got to change the culture as well. And there's got to be, it's not just about me putting myself in other people's shoes, it's the other way around. We talk about, we do a lot of collaborations on projects worldwide and things like that. But, being diversity, and don't get me wrong, it's hard work. We have to be understanding of each other and our cultures and our backgrounds, where we come from, and what time it is when we're going to have this meeting and whether we're all up for this discussion. It's hard work, but it's good work. It will pay off, and it does pay off in the end.
I'm going to tell a story on myself because I have to do that. Miranda is one of the contributors to the podcast, and she tells an incredible story, and maybe she will tell us a little bit about this man of African descent who is considered a traitor as far as the maroon cultures of Suriname are concerned, the indigenous cultures, but he's also a hero in the medical world. And this is the kind of contradiction that the podcast is about, and about history as well. But the story I'm going to tell on myself is that Laura Cheater, who is one of the beautiful producers and directors of this podcast, and I think Ruth was with us as well. And we, Ruth Barnes, the other director and co-producer, we went to the Natural History Museum to look for Dr. Miranda Lowe. So what they were asked to do was be in your space of work and have an object or two that you like. Now, I've only been in the Natural History Museum a couple of times. My mind, I heard her name, I was in the space, I walked right past her looking for Dr. Miranda Lowe. I did it. It took me a couple of seconds, and then I thought, oh, and I checked myself. I stood there, and I thought, why did I do that? How did I do that? And I will never forget that moment of myself, hollering about diversity and what have you, and the sister was standing there ready, and I walked past her. So that's kind of like about the institution. That's kind of like about your own unconscious sort of mindset about the institution as well. And that's what I mean by the diversity business in a way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. People talk to me about decolonizing museums and universities. What does that mean, and how do you do that?
I'm going to start with this one. For me, decolonizing is a word that is so widely, that has so many definitions depending on people, that it becomes really hard to have one set. So I'm going to speak just for myself. I consider that we can talk about decolonizing only when we understand colonization. And if you don't understand colonization, decolonizing takes on a different meaning, which is a very contemporary now meaning. Whereas for me, if you go back and you look at the history of colonization, British Empire, French Empire, Portuguese Empire, all these stuff, we don't necessarily have time, but we have a few stories. If you do understand this history of oppression, then you also understand that it stood alongside a history of resistance that is incredibly important for me. The history of resistance is the history of anti-colonization or anti-colonial history. If you understand those two histories, it's impossible to react as a colonizer, 21st century colonizer. So it seems to me that decolonizing has to go back in time and has to look at what has been learned from our ancestors and then bring it back to the 21st century and see how we have constantly been resisting, surviving, and even thriving. And from there, you can teach about not necessarily removing what exists, but actually creating that space where there's a narrative that is an alternative narrative that sits alongside other narratives. If you feel inclined and you want to remove the old dead black, well, the old dead white people, please do. Personally, I keep them. And I keep them why? Because I keep them, well, as relics of the past. That's it.
You know, one thing, Olivette is one of the contributors on the podcast, as is Miranda. They both changed my life in a very profound way. I read history at university, and I'm sure a lot of you did too. I also came up during the civil rights era, so it was very, very much about being very focused on slavery and the fight against slavery. So that unconsciously, Africa begins at slavery. The struggle, everything begins at that time, almost as if Africa comes into being in 1619 for Americans and you know, before that. And what I learned from you was, and also from Miranda, the complexity of African history in relation to slavery in particular, in relation to colonialization, and that we need to, first of all, go back way past slavery because it's a huge, massive history. Some of it we can see here at this museum and in other places. Huge history that isn't even talked about or documented because, as I say in the podcast, history is told by the people who write it. And if we don't get a chance to write it, if we don't get a chance to talk about it, can you talk a tiny bit, and I'm gonna ask Miranda to do this as well, talk a tiny bit about those contradictions that are so interesting that you pointed out, particularly the women, the Sengar, who I was quite amazed by them.
Yes, I talked about Queen Zinga and the fact that she was a powerful queen who got into power. She wouldn't expect it to get into power, but she got into power through diplomacy and while at the same time plotting and setting up her own mercenaries and her own private army. But what was interesting for me to look at her life is the way she constantly adapted to the invaders. She negotiate with them, but at the same time, she resists them. She converts to Catholicism, but at the same time, she keeps her own identity. She understands that sometimes you have to compose with the oppressor for the time being to kind of learn from that oppressor. That's what she did with the Portuguese. And she was then outdone by she had to fight against the Portuguese and then the Dutch, and it was just nonstop. So by the age of, I think it was around 60, you can still find her in the battle, physically fighting in the battle. So the contradictions for me are these areas where, we call them gray areas, but these areas where you actually need sometimes to choose your battle, so to speak, and wait for the right moment to do what you need to do. Yeah.
So for me, I heard a very sort of famous writer say, talked a lot about Africa being, raped and I felt in learning from you that it was again, as you always say, it was not invented the minute that the Europeans landed, but there were complex societies. There were societies equal to Rome. There were societies equal to Greece, like the Kush and the Kandaki, who stood up to Rome and to Greece, and also did what they needed to do in order to survive, so that the history of Africa in particular, becomes not a history of people lying down, being supine, but actually negotiating, finding out what to do, how to live, how they function in this environment. So it was incredible for me, and really changed me, because I began to see this huge pantheon, this huge panorama of Africa, not being sort of standing there falling down, but fighting back, but also doing business if they had to do the business. It was partly that as well.
I just add something. Yes, a couple of days ago I did an interview, BBC Radio Bristol, and one of the things that the presenter said was, Africans were selling, he didn't say it that way, but basically they were selling their own people, and then they were fighting amongst themselves between tribes. And that just ignited something in me, and I was ready to tell him about empires and the wars. And I was cut off. He basically cut me off. But it really annoyed me that in 21st century, people are still talking about the tribes fighting amongst themselves. And I'm thinking, as a historian, we haven't done our job properly. Yeah.
Or been allowed to do it, or had the access, to do it. Miranda and Graman Quassi, your person who, can you tell us a bit about him as well? And I'm presenting this sort of landscape, this contradiction, because sometimes we're taught the history from one side, and it's bigger than that.
So the story of Graman Quassi originates from one of the botanical ceiling panels in the Hinsey Hall at the Natural History Museum. There's a plant there, or an illustration painting of a plant called Quassia amara, and that plant was named after Graman by Carl Linnaeus. And what had happened in around the 1750s, Graman he was enslaved as a child and taken away from Ghana and moved to Suriname. But there, growing up, he learnt or taught himself all the medicinal properties of various plants, including this one. And by the sort of mid-1750s, he had discovered that if you boil the bark of that plant, or the leaves, stew the leaves, that the properties from that, it's a bitter tea, but it would be used to purge intestinal parasites, reduce fever. And so he was well known as, the person to go to, the doctor, the healer. I call him the botanist as well. And so that he sold his recipe, and samples of the plant came back and went into the hands of Carl Linnaeus, and then later, Carl Linnaeus. For those of you that don't know, Carl Linnaeus is known as the godfather or the grandfather of taxonomy, so naming plants and animals, a system that scientists still use elements of it today. So the rest is history in terms of the plant, and I tell this story on a Black History tour that I give at the museum in the Hinsey Hall. So in one way, I'm saying, oh gosh, isn't that really amazing that someone like Carl Linnaeus would name a plant after this person of colour, and all of that goes with it. But then Graman, for the local community in Suriname, he fought against the Maroons with the Dutch. And so that, that's another side to the story, that it's not easy, and he's not well liked. He had his ear cut off as a result, but he was honoured by the Dutch later on in his life, and I think he lived to, or as far as the documents say, to a grand old age of 90, and in some considerable wealth, more than his own and indigenous peoples.
And you know, on the podcast, you and I have a little discussion about being inside global museums, you know, being inside of them, and also having a person, having a contradictory person like Graman Quassi, who is considered a great botanist, a great scientist, but if you were to go to Suriname and say his name, you wouldn't get the same reception that you would in The Hague.
Yeah, I would assume so, but I've not been to Suriname, so.
But I mean, but you know that, yeah. But you know.
Yeah, I mean that's documented, and I'm looking forward to a trip as well.
Yeah, but I think what I'm saying is it's about the contradiction.
It is definitely about the contradiction that you know, and this is the thing. I'm interpreting other people's story. He didn't write his story, but it is a contradiction. But why? I tell that story because not many people have known that story, and I think it's something that we all need to be aware of, but also, you know, the contribution that people of colour that have made to society, and what I mean, because that plant, and I'm following this trail now as well. That plant has been used widely, like a lot of other plants, widely in the pharmaceutical industry still today. So the economics about that, the contribution this person has given to science and to medicine and to the health of other people is amazing.
When I went to Elmina 2 decades ago, before it was really become, you know, a place, I remember, and I said, standing on the ramparts of Elmina, and being African American and coming from the generation that I come from. I mean, we invented Wakanda. I mean, let's just be honest about it, and everything that Wakanda is and isn't. I know the good things about Wakanda and what Wakanda does, and the agency Wakanda allows, but it's also another flip side of it. So as an African American in those days, you go there like, you know, basically wearing, you know, 5 or 6 nations' clothes on you, just like if you were in Europe wearing a Swiss hat and think you're being European or African or whatever that is. And then going to Elmina and standing on those ramparts and looking and thinking, wow, first of all, my ancestors survived this. And we find out in the podcast that many of the, maybe even most of the slave revolts on board ship were led by women, and that makes sense because the men were chained below, the women were allowed up on the ship for the sexual violence that was imposed upon them, but also because they were women and nobody believed they could do anything. And of course, they turned a lot of ships around. Lloyd's of London was invented basically to deal with slave revolts on ship, called Insurrection of Cargo. So it was really interesting being at Elmina because my questions began there. I wanted to understand, especially when I went to Kumasi, I wanted to understand how did my ancestors come down from there? What happened because Europeans didn't go up there, couldn't go up there because the climate, what happened? So what I want to say, ask Velika, and what's interesting about the Dutch, because we don't talk about the Dutch a lot, especially in this part of the world, that we do talk about Elmina because Elmina was controlled by the Dutch. And your museum, the Rijksmuseum, is, first of all, not only the sort of great exhibition place for one of the greatest artists in Western art, Rembrandt, but also it is a combination of the Natural History Museum. It is a combination of the National Gallery. It is a monstrous institution in the Netherlands itself. It is huge. It's a huge operation. And you're there, and you're doing this show in a land where people still black up their faces and walk around, and you gotta fight them to get that off. How do you function? How are you doing that? I don't know what else to say.
Yes, it's daunting, yeah. Can I park that question
Yes,
for a little
ma'am.
bit? Because I just want to add something to the story that Miranda was telling.
Yes.
That there's such a
Graman
beautiful
Quassi.
story about Graman Quassi, and it's really interesting how complex his story is. That's absolutely true. But I want to add something that I think is really interesting and that has not been said before here on stage, is that he is also one of the first people who came over from Suriname to the Netherlands because he was paid to help the colonial government fight the Maroons, and in turn the Maroons set fire to his house. So he wanted his house back, and he asked for the government in Suriname to pay that for him, and they refused. So he said, I'm going to go to the Dutch government and I'm going to get my money. And so he did. He traveled, he came and talked to the prince, William V, the stadtholder, and he got his money for his house. But the point I'm making is that in that period, halfway through the 18th century, there were already people coming over from the Americas, from the Caribbean to the Netherlands, because that was where the central, the highest courts were, where they could fight for their rights and demand their rights. So if you look at the national history of the Netherlands, you could see these people as some of the first freedom fighters, some of the first people who came and demanded for human rights, and that human rights was not something that came about in the 20th century, but it started way before there because there was this unjust system that was colonialism. But we just don't see them as such, and we don't remember them as such. So that is something that we should add to the way that we see European history.
That's so fascinating because one of the things I did discover in the research on this is the first black image, named black image in Western art happened here. A black man who was the herald of Henry VII and Henry VIII, called John Blank, ha ha Blank, and he's a beautiful guy, and he comes into history because he's demanding his money. He finds out he didn't get paid, and then there's the other brothers who, when Henry VIII's flagship, the Mary Rose, sank, in the 16th century, and I learned that from Dr. Miranda Kaufman, that when you look at Wikipedia, it says Venetians went down to salvage the ship. And remember, in those days, there was no salvage equipment. But actually, when they say black folks don't swim, those were all black people who did that. And that was their specialty, was to go into salvage. And again, we hear now, you're telling me that Graman comes into history asking for his due. And that's how he comes in. So it's not about people being chained up. It's about people asking for what they're owed. And that's
There are more
important as
stories
well.
like that about women who did that as well.
Yes.
But you asked me about the Rijksmuseum and
Yes.
what it's like to be working
Yes.
there. Well, it's
You don't
a
have to tell us
really
everything, Velika.
big adventure.
Yes.
It's really nice being there. I mean, I've done research into the way that different countries are dealing with their slavery past in museums, and I've mostly traveled to countries where the majority of the people can relate to the experience of being enslaved. And even there, it's a very traumatic part of history that people are reluctant to be looking back upon. But I've never worked in an institution where the majority of the people who work there, the vast majority is white, but also all the visitors are white. So while I'm trying to bring in something from my background, which is a Caribbean background, which is from thinking and learning through Black studies, African studies, everything I've learned in Latin American studies, for example, that is a huge challenge. But what we're constantly struggling with is what the museum fears, that the visitor who doesn't know anything about colonial history, how that visitor will react. Because the visitor will be relates to a national history in which he thinks slavery did not form part of that. to take that National Museum and do a slavery exhibition is then a very, very big challenge.
Yeah.
So I'm trying, I'm learning through colleagues who constantly ask me questions from that perspective. And the beautiful thing I think about it is that we get to ask new questions, not just the concepts that have been developed in Black academia, in African American academia. I can bring that in, but they in turn ask me questions that I have never thought about before. So I think we're gonna be able to go deeper into this history, because it is world history, from the perspective of what the European must have experienced in that period. So these are questions about responsibility, about what did they know, about could they even imagine what life must have been like for enslaved people, did they have a choice, to what point? And I think those are not questions that I would ask, so it's important to bring all of that together, and together we can write a new parts of world history.
You know, oh, you're getting some applause. Let me stop you. Yeah, that's right. We're beautiful. This kind of series, and the series and the talks that are coming after this in Reclamation, grew out of some conversations that Hartwig and I have been having over 9 months, just talking about, you know, what do I want to do here? What should we be doing? So this has pretty much been a big curve for me. Hartwig introduced me to Edward Glisson, the great Caribbean writer, thinker, poet of Francophonie, and that opened my life to the Caribbean. Because, you know, as an American, it's like, yeah, we go there for holidays and stuff, but I'm not knocking a bunch of Americans here, but I mean, that's what it is. And I didn't know enough about the Caribbean. So for me now, the Caribbean becomes a very interesting place of transmutation. It becomes a very interesting place of resistance. It becomes a very interesting place of culture. It becomes a very interesting place of coming together. We know from the podcast that there was a great warrior tribe of women in I think, I can't remember the part of Africa they came from, but they were at war. Benin. Yeah, Dahomey, and got themselves deported on the slave ship, wound up in Haiti, and of course they were the ones that held off the French. The French didn't know that they had actually brought over this warrior class of women, and these sisters held them off until the French finally said, listen, pay us some money and we'll back off. And they kept paying money. Haiti paid money until about 1945-46 to the French. So it's that discovery of the Caribbean for me. Now, I feel this is the whole of the Caribbean, the Dutch, the English, and I don't think it gets enough respect. I don't think it gets enough focus. I don't think it gets enough voice. I don't think it gets enough the whole thing, because that's where it changes and begins. That is my feeling. And so, having said that, because that's my passion. I'm totally 100% Caribbean now. What needs to be reclaimed, or maybe you said it, what needs to be reclaimed in relation to Black history? I don't even know what Black history, but anyway, I think we all have an individual feeling or definition of it. What needs to be reclaimed in relation to Black history? What aspect of it is missing, lost, ignored? What are we in search of now? Velika. Velika.
Well, what I'd love for us to do is what I've become more and more passionate about. I work at 2 institutions. The one is in historiography, and we use a lot of written sources. The other is a museum, and we use mainly objects. And what I miss in all of this is what I was used to that was normal in the Caribbean, where I come from, is the oral sources and immaterial heritage. Because through that, those forms of heritage, you come to insights in the past that you'll never reach through the objects or through the written sources. You come to so much more than that material heritage. The material heritage will bring you to the stories about the wealth and the power, and about mainly masculine power as well. But if you go through the oral sources, you will find the stories of people who were enslaved, how they felt about it, whether they felt human or dehumanized, how they went about it, how they came to be warriors, how they came to resist, in what ways. And those are the stories that we have not heard enough about. And the strong part is also that it's not just about that romanticized version of power and wealth and the big monuments we see here. It's about the experience of being human in every sense of the way. The pain, the guilt if you are marooned and you flee and you leave your family behind. What must have been like, the choices you have to make. What do you dare do and not? And I think that's so much more powerful and something that's been missing all over, that I think that's what we should strive for now.
Thank you.
Yeah, off the back of that, I totally agree with what you said. And we, within those stories, it is all about being human. It's all about us connecting with those stories. And you know, there needs to be more. The reason why some of these oral histories have not been teased out before, it's all about where institutions place the value on these things, and if the value is just totally in objects, well, it's only got one kind of meaning, one kind, or you know, in a certain kind of connection. But you can get such a much more rich connection to objects and other things with the oral histories. You know, the oral histories and stories are also things that have been, you know, stories that have been passed down through generations as well, that tell you about generations of people, and investigate whether those stories are still told in certain communities now worldwide. Things like that can offer so much dynamics to you know, things and stories and objects within cultural institutions. So, yeah, I do believe it's all about the value, and that has been missing as part of it all.
For me, of course, I completely agree. I look at the way we teach history, and I think that, going back to your point, it's not just about the monument and all the rest of it. I look at the history. I teach history through memory, and through memory, you also look at things that are important to certain communities. Food, for example, how you tell a story through food. It's a story of resistance. It's a beautiful story that completely changes the way you look at colonial history, and the legacies of the past. So there's that, for me, that needs to be reclaimed. But there's also the fact that we always tell, not always, but we often tell these days Black British history through white history. It's mediated by Western history. How about intercultural history? How about the history between Black people in people of Asian descent? How about the Sidi community that has been in India for the last 300 years? That's a Black history as well. So I would like to see that reclaimed as well, not always through the kind of story black-white slavery. Because 21st century Britain is a beautiful story of intercultural that is not black and white, but black and Asian, and all sort of combination as well.
And in families, what do you want to ask me?
I want to start, and from a very personal point of view, it's going to be a declaration of love. I'm completely in love with her voice, and I love this woman.
Pourquoi pas, mais
oui, bien sûr.
J'adore.
you could. She she would never know how much I love her, but never mind.
I do now.
You do? Oh.
No.
So what has been tearing me apart is seeing people getting through her. I'm a social media addict, I confess, sorry. And I have seeing people tearing her apart on social media, the newspapers, and things like that. And as a black woman, not just a public figure, but as a black woman as a whole, I wonder if you could tell us about how you cope with stress, anxiety, or pain, anger, and all that.
Merci beaucoup. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said that if you're a writer, you have to have a little bit of ice in your heart. I love human beings. I love humans. That makes me laugh. Also, there's a tiny bit of the anthropologist in me. So, when people say to me, people say, you're always talking about white men. You must hate white men. I say, well, that's what my husband tells me all the time. Blah, 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 blah. And, I love watching people do this. Because, no, seriously, and if you're a playwright or if you're a novelist, you know what I'm saying. There's a part of me that's actually kind of provoking it a little bit. Like, I call Donald Trump Twitler. And, and I get these people, the only thing that actually is painful is stupidity. Stupidity is painful, and that's hard. When you get folks who are running things and they're stupid, that's the part that really gets me, and that depresses me. Other than that, I really enjoy social media. In fact, Piers Morgan blocked me, which is one of my claims to fame. And, Piers was the one that's telling Meghan to go back where she came from. So I tweeted to Piers today, we would love you to go back where you came from. So I like it. I do like it. Yes, thank you very much, Miss Miranda.
Oh, well, this might be a question that might come from the audience at some point, but so I'm getting in there first.
You'll be nicer, right?
No, it's just, it's something. So this is on behalf of my Museum Detox family.
Yeah, okay, go girl. Oh, come on, sisters, raise up. Okay, y'all lighten up now.
Should the UK have a Black British museum? I mean, myself and a friend in the audience, we went 2 years ago and we visited the one in Smithsonian. To be built
Lonnie's museum, well, everybody's museum.
And for me, it was an amazing experience.
Very emotional.
I never thought it would be. Very emotional. I want my family to go with me. It was one of those things that I just thought everybody needs to go in their lifetime. It was that powerful and moving.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? There should be a museum for everybody, and there should be a museum for the world, too. So it's just, these things are not contradictory at all. And I say, why not? Why not? As long as museum doors are open, I want to be able to feel, because when we talk about diversity, I found out when I moved here that there was a certain community, Black British community that wanted to be diverse from me. And I didn't understand what that meant. And this was the first time I was called an American was in Britain. Because I didn't, we don't call Black people Americans in America. No, I'm not joking. So, when people started calling me an American, I was like, who? Oh, me. So, yeah, I think so, because I think we need to develop a voice. The voice is here, but even more so, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm really feel that the Black British voice is being diminished very, very much so, particularly the Caribbean voice. So I'm very interested, and we do have the Black Cultural Archives, we do have museums, so which I all urge you to go see this beautiful place, because it's just got some incredible things and memories, artifacts. But we do need it now, because we need the voice to become present. Because this last election, I was appalled, absolutely appalled by the lack of Black British voices in the public sphere. When I came here 30 years ago, those voices were there. They are being diminished, literally. So if we can, if a museum takes a museum to do that, bring it on, bring it on. Velika.
Well, I can do
Ask
a
me in
love
Dutch,
declaration.
because
Okay.
listen, no, seriously, I was in a meeting with and I was in this meeting at the Reich Museum where Velika had to give a presentation. And the Dutch are the most polite people in the world, because nobody can speak Dutch except Neil McGregor, which is like a surprise. Like, what? Neil speaks Dutch too? And nobody speaks Dutch except the Dutch. And so but they're very polite. And everybody said, now we must speak in Dutch. So I said, okay. And I sat back like this for an hour. And you were giving an incredible address, but I didn't know what you said. So, but you look awesome. Okay, so what do you want to ask?
Thank you. Yeah. I've only met you. This is the second time we meet, so I can't do a love
and this is an
declaration
aggressive
like
sister
Olivette
right
did.
here. This woman chased me out of the museum and helped me get back to my hotel and steered me away from the fashion street, because if I'd seen that, I'd been in real trouble. Yes.
That was my pleasure.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, you were just talking about voices, which voices are heard or not. I was just saying that I would like museums to be less object-driven. I myself am very much narrative-driven, and you are a playwright. So what do you think that our new narrative should be like in our new museums, be it African-American, African-British museums, or the Dutch Rijksmuseum? What are the new narratives that we should be working on?
Thank you, Velika. Well, as a playwright, this is a narrative space for me. This is a musical space for me as well. Now, I know that there are objects here, but these objects are narrative for me all the time. Now, what I'm taking is, how do you make this conscious? How do you raise this up? But of course, what is happening to us when we come to a museum, because the first time I came to Amsterdam on the hippie trail, okay, that was a wild time, and I saw the Night Watch, which blew me away, because you only see illustrations of the Night Watch. If you ever seen this piece, this painting is coming off the canvas at you. It's coming like this. And I think, and I believe, that we all experience objects in a museum as movable and mutable. We are educated out of thinking like that. There's nothing in a museum that's static. There's nothing in a museum that doesn't move. There's nothing in a museum that doesn't change. There's nothing in a museum. They're not statues, they're us. So for me, it's just a question of, how do I make that narrative conscious for other people outside? Because when I walk into this museum, when I walk in the Natural History Museum, when I walk in the Reich Museum, it's buzzing, it's talking, it's singing, it's hollering, it's screaming, it's all of these kinds of things. And maybe we need, in a way, to get more artists inside of museums to make that conscious, because it is happening anyway. We're educated out of thinking that it's not happening. Little kids will tell you it's happening. A little kid will tell you all the time, somebody's talking in here, what's going on? And we need to keep that kind of thing, make that thing conscious now. We really do. So we can beat TikTok, because TikTok is the enemy now. So, so we can do that. Thank you all. See, you know the thing that's a killer is to be beautiful and have brains, and this is like right here, okay? So I'm telling you. Okay, question time. Okay, I'm gonna take 3 questions at a time, and for the purpose of time, and the mics were coming to you. Okay.
Sorry, I've got one here. I'm a part of Museum Detox. Hi. And I work at the National Archives currently. What I'm really interested in, I grew up in Jamaica, and when I
Somebody said, "Ooh!" Right.
when I came over here, I was really struck by the lack of a sense of humor about dealing with really traumatic history. So, you know.
What does that mean?
So, in Jamaica, you know, a lot of this stuff, this really violent history, is talked about with humor in it. Humor is kind of acknowledged as a survival tool.
I got
It's,
you. Okay, I got
it's
you.
a moment
wit and all
that
that,
breaks
yeah.
the kind of the trauma, but also kind of creates these moments of deep intimacy.
I understand.
You'll see it in music, you'll see it in films, you'll see it in plays a lot more. I wonder, because I miss that, because sometimes dealing with this sort of history, if you don't have any sense of humor in it, it's just harrowing, and it's hard to push through and keep going when you're dealing with just harrowing histories.
Or maybe United Kingdom make you not laugh. I don't know, but...
Well, this is my question. My question is, do you think that there is space for humor to exist when the space is predominantly white? Can humor only exist when there's safety in it, there's the intimacy of it, and there's the understanding that you're not alone, and that humor is sort of the way that you reach out and you say to someone, I see you, and we'll get through it together.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Another question. That's very interesting. Another observation question. Yes. There is a mic coming for you. Wait a minute, hang on. Okay, you got to do it.
Shall I speak? Is it?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Winsome Pinnock, and I'm also a playwright.
Yes.
And my
Ooh,
question...
who?
Winsome. Hello,
Girl,
Bonnie.
Winsome, I'm also a playwright. Okay, Winsome. You just won a couple of awards. Okay, right. Go on, sister.
Hi,
All right.
Bonnie.
I'm also a
no,
playwright.
my-
Right.
I'm very interested in the education of young people. And when you look at the curriculum, say the GCSE curriculum, there is, of course, no black history there. There is no black literature. And I just wonder how we give young people the access to this history. And when we do that, how we sort of protect them. Because I read somewhere that when, I'd heard that when young black people hear about or learn this history, sometimes it drives them into despair.
Yes.
They have this sense that there is, they have no future. So I wonder, so there are 2 questions really, how we allow young people to learn about themselves, because it's sometimes obvious that often they don't know their history, and how we give them something that makes that valuable and allows them to have a sense of agency and hope.
Listen, because she won't say it, I'm going to say it. That's Winsome Pinnock, who is arguably, I'm not going to argue about it, she is the greatest playwright of color in this country, and she has held this position, as far as I'm concerned, for a long, long, beautiful time, and great inspiration to me. I'm really happy you're here.
Bonnie, that's lovely. Thank you.
A great chronicler of the Black British experience. You must read her work. She is literally a genius. So listen to this. Okay, see, I'm American, so I talk like this, but I'm not lying. Okay, one more question, and then we'll deal with these 3 beautiful questions. One more. Sound like Donald Trump. He always says beautiful. Yes. I hate him. Okay. Oh.
Hello?
Oh, there's a mic. I'm sorry,
Hi.
sir.
My name's DJ.
Hello,
Just
DJ.
wanted to make reference to something. I know you was with a colleague of mine, a friend of mine. You was
Me?
at a conference, Dr. Olivette
Oh, sorry. Yes, sir.
was at a conference in Liverpool a few months ago. And when she described the conference to me it was wild, for lack of a better term. In other words, she was talking about how most of the academics there were white. Predominantly the academics were from the US. And she was just talking about a lot of the academics who were white hadn't read key work around other black academics in their field. And on top of that, she told me that the whole thing concluded on a Sunday in something which was a plantation house, pretty much, where she saw a photo of which was an enslaved African, and the rest of the people in the picture were white. And it kind of brought up the insensitivity and how much black academics are not valued. Then it brought up to me, as a person that was born in this country of Eastern Caribbean heritage, I think about how many black people want to be in academia as historians that I've met personally, but they're not there. And I wanted to ask you, how do we encourage people and make people who are from Britain or interested in the Caribbean or Africa that were born in this country to be academics in this country in the history field? And I think it's very important because even as me, I'm not a historian, I'm a primary school teacher, but I'm very interested in my history.
You're not, but you are.
Okay.
Okay.
But I'm very interested in my history and I have a big passion for it. And I see other people that have a passion for it and want to be academics, but they're just put off by what other academics have told them. So I want to know, how can we encourage black people born in this country or raised in this country, because not everyone's born in this country, to be academics in this country?
And brother, you reminded me of something. I've seen a survey where the subject that Black British university students going into university, history is the one they don't want to take.
But there's
at
people out there that
university.
want to do it though, that's the problem.
That's what I'm saying, but I'm reiterating what you are saying. They don't want to take the subject, and the reason they don't want to take the subject, they don't want to hear about the empire. Yes, one more person, yes. Yes.
Hi.
And then you all can respond to whatever you want.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm over here.
She needs a mic down here too.
My question, I guess, is kind of directed to Dr. Smeulders, and it's kind of around the slavery exhibition that you're working on. And I just kind of wanted to find out a bit more about how you're positioning it in terms of, are you positioning it as Black history? Are you positioning it more as like Dutch national history, or is it like European history and things like that? Because I kind of struggle with the idea of slavery being Black history, because I think the idea of Black history and slavery are kind of synonymous, and I think that's a bit unfair, and I think that is kind of damaging to especially people like me who grew up in the UK. The only Black, in quotes, history we learned was about slavery, and I found that very unfair and very damaging, especially as someone who was the only Black girl in my class. When it comes to what is considered Black history, it focused on slavery and very negative and very violent things, whereas the other people in my class got to learn about European history, which was very nuanced, very glorious and very positive. So I just wanted to find out a bit more how you're positioning that exhibition, and just wanted to know a bit more about that.
Okay, thank you. So we have, thank you very much. That's excellent. Because that's the point, actually. So we have a question about where does wit, which, let's face it, saved a lot of us, just wit, fare. How do we teach now? Winsome, am I right? How do we teach young people now? And what do we do now? The brother asked about, teaching history and how do we get more Black academics inside of universities in particular, and also in particular in relation to the slavery museum. The slavery exhibition, but I think every exhibition. How do you position an exhibition that has to do with people of African descent in particular? How do you position it? Where do you come from when you position it? So anything that you all want to pick up on?
I want to start with the question about getting academics. Yes, I was at that exhibition, that conference, and yes, I moaned about it. In fact, I ranted for such a long time on Twitter that my fingers were aching. So, and from that rant, actually, I decided to start a list of Black black people, PhD students or academics who are working on not just slavery, but race, discrimination, but also Caribbean history, African history. And that list is coming, I'm putting things together, but it's coming out, and there are quite a few people who are working, who have worked on that, who have left. Some of them stopped their PhD, some of them didn't find, were not given jobs, even when they did outstanding research. And so the situation is dire. I'm very happy when people say, oh yeah, the first female black woman professor in history, but it's incredibly isolating, and in many ways, I know I shouldn't be so ungrateful, but I find it incredibly insulting. I find it painful, and I find that it says something about not only our world of academia, but it says something about the world of historians. So what I'm trying to do, and I can't do it on my own, is getting into such certain spaces. Royal Historical Society published a report that does not satisfy everybody, but it highlights something, the situation you're actually talking about, and and having a black woman being vice president of the Royal Historical Society has changed people's, not everybody, but has changed people's views on the fact that Britain is diverse. I know it sounds incredible, we all know that, but some don't. So it's small steps. As far as academia is concerned, I really, really believe in mentorship, in mentoring. The problem is when you're only you end up doing a lot of the work, exactly what I told you at the beginning. So that list for me is very important because it means that students, academics, or students between themselves, we can perhaps find our own space, because at the moment that space is not being carved out for us. So why don't we create our own space and see, from my experience, how I got there? How do we occupy those spaces? How do we get in? In terms of the teaching is constant fight, okay? I was saying earlier that Boris Johnson has declared that he's going to introduce the history of the British Empire back to the curriculum. Well, hey, fabulous. Problem. How is it going to be taught? Who again is going to teach it? And are we going back to, it's a constant fight. So I believe that the public, people outside academia, can do much, much more than we can actually. You know, so it's not just academia, it's the power is us all collectively, museums, all sort of places that we teach that history that needs to continue, because otherwise it was just, well, we just die. I know it sounds dramatic, but yeah, thanks.
Miranda.
Well, just off the back of what you've just said, Olivette, that it's all about resilience, isn't it, at the end of the day? And like you said, finding our own spaces and things like that. You know, museum detox, for me, we've carved out our own niche. We are people of colour that are in a lot of different historical institutions, but come together to provide that support for us, that we're on our own most of the time, but coming together, showing that support, providing mentorship for one another, emailing out jobs that come through other networks, signposting and nurturing ourselves within, to put ourselves in positions to be on boards, to be vice chairs of societies and things like that. So that's what we do, and that's what perhaps on the history side as well. I'm going to put a bit of humour in this as well.
Yeah, please.
Join the natural history side of it as well. So I'm not a historian, but I love history, and through my science, I'm teasing out historical stories. That's all part and parcel of it. And for me, I have, as people that know me, I have fingers in many, many pies. And so, I work with artists, and I work with historians. And my role as a curator within the museum, I do not see my role in there that's where it begins and ends. I am part of society, so I'm always looking at the wider context, and I do believe that, you've got to band together with, I talk about it, sounds a bit like Star Wars, but, using the external forces to affect the internal, that's vital.
And how are you positioning, or how are you,
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do it by yourself, but what are you thinking in relation to slavery?
Well, I think we're doing something pretty exciting, actually. Obviously, Black history has been marginalized in the Dutch academic world and in Dutch museums as well. And now there's a group of people in the Netherlands that know so little about colonial history that the debate is very much polarizing between people who feel that it's not part of their history, so we should shut up about it, and people who come from the Caribbean, for example, that say it is part of our history, so we say that it should be part of what you show in museums. So for years now, whenever slavery was part of an exhibition, it was only during a commemorative year. In 2003 or 2013, that's the moment where we celebrate the abolition of slavery. But that frames it in a certain way. And actually, it happened kind of by accident, but I'm really happy about it. This year is not a commemorative year. And this is the first time that the National Museum is doing a slavery exhibition, which is, even before we started, the point is already made that this is Dutch national history. And what we're doing, we're trying to make a very personal exhibition. So it won't be about the starting till the end. It won't be trying to talk about all those huge amounts of people that were transported. It will focus on 10 people only. 10 people that lived during that era, that had very different positions within that colonial system. And we hope that this way the visitor can replace himself in those shoes, put yourself in the shoes of the people who lived then, who had to deal with all those different circumstances, who were living as part of the elite in the Netherlands, or who were a poor Dutch baker in the Netherlands, or who were enslaved and living in plantations, or put to the choice of whether you were daring enough to flee or not. And in that way, I'm hoping that people will both see the personal stories and the personal misery and all its emotions that are part of that, but also that they see the universal relevance of this, that they hear about the story of a maroon woman, for example, and that they can put themselves in her shoes because they're a mother as well. Just because of other things than only the surface, only what you look like. And I hope that people get to see that what happened then, what the enslaved went through, that it actually is relevant for all of us everywhere in the world to learn about that and learn from that. So I'm hoping that after this year, all of the Netherlands will think it's Dutch national history as well, not just Caribbean. Didn't happen outside, it happened in Europe as well.
Thank you, Velika. Can I just say before we wrap that, and just two questions. I used to be a student, a very ignorant student of the great Yoruba pantheon, which really fascinated me, still does. And of course we know that one of the deities is Elegba, the trickster. Elegba came with us. And I think sometimes we do lose our sense of humor, our sense of playfulness, our sense of change. I think and I feel that those of us who are descended from the enslaved survived because we were mutable. We knew how to change. We knew what dancing and smiling was about. We knew what was behind that. We knew where the struggle was, and we knew what the fight was, because the deities came with us, and they're still here. And they're still playing their tricks, and they're still protecting us. And I'm not saying this necessarily in a religious sense, but to talk about it in a multidimensional sense is one of the things that we came with on those ships. And the second question I'd like to address Winsome's, as a teacher, I used to be a teacher, and Winsome is a great teacher. I think always, and I'm not working with young people now, but I think that we must give young people respect. And we must, and by respect, I mean let them speak. And by letting them speak, I mean letting them say what they have to say, and then we learn their language. And then we talk back to them, not necessarily in their language, they don't expect us to do that. But we talk to them back in understanding what they are saying to us. They are saying to us the world that they see, and we must listen to them. We must hear them. We must listen to them, because they are the future. They are shaping the future. And we, if we are teachers, if we are lovers of children and our children, we must find their language, and we must defend them at every step of the way. And I want to say to all of you, you're very polite. You didn't ask me why I have OBE after my name. You didn't ask me that. Is that, and that,
I know.
is that English or what? No, you didn't ask me. Why don't you ask me?
Okay. Bonnie, should I do the voice? No. How dare you haven't received, why did you accept that OBE? Couldn't you just have turned it down?
Okay. See, this gives me a chance, okay. First of all, I never put it after my name, and I think, and it's not because I'm ashamed of it. I never do. My father was here. He turned 20 years old the day after D-Day. He grew up in the rural Mississippi during the Depression, so I don't have to tell you that story. And he also was in the United States Army, in which, believe it or not, men of African descent were not routinely armed in a war zone, okay? So he came here and he worked to help build up the resources of this country. He finally got a gun in the Ardennes at the last German offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. I was way into the military when General Patton finally said, "I'm giving these black men guns, okay? Do you mind?" My dad had a great love of this country because he saw black, I know I'm not trying to be romantic, but he saw black men and black service people from the Caribbean in particular walk into pubs and walk into the pub and not have to wait for some white person to say, "You're not welcome in here, get out." They went in there, and one of them told my father, "Oh, we're not Americans, okay? We don't know what you do, all right? We're here to fight for the country." So that really made him feel a very strong attention to this. He loved this museum as well because we read about it in the Encyclopedia Britannica that he got from door to door. And I took the medal for him because nobody gave him a medal for nothing. And so I think, okay, if the Queen's gonna give me a medal, I'm giving it to him. Unfortunately, he died before I got this medal. So I kept it, and then my mother died 3 years ago, and my mother was so chic. She really did me a favor in the casket. She actually had a gown that was the color of the ribbon of the OBE medal. So I pinned it on her, and I'm just thinking, both of them were so ultra chic, they up there fighting over this medal right now, okay? So there you are. That's why I took it. You didn't ask me why I joined the board of this institution either. Come on,
I'll ask this one. So, Bonnie, why did you join the board of the British Museum?
Well, first of all, I was really, really shocked that Neil McGregor asked me. I was like, what? And it's because as a child, growing up on the south side of Chicago, sharing a bedroom with my 3 sisters, being in my little corner. This museum, the illustrations in the book was where I could dream. I was thinking of the big world. I could see a lot of different things. So I kind of fell in love. And I thought, right, let me find a space to be in here. What can I do? And how can I bring more people in to this museum? Because after all, y'all paying for it. So, you are. You people laughing. So, so I wanted to be a part of helping to do that, helping to be a part of it. I still feel that way. And I want to say to all of you today, and seriously, I know for some of you, this is the first time you've been in here, so how come? The second thing is, I'm really deeply grateful to be welcomed in this country, deeply grateful to all of you for coming tonight, and thank you very much for being in this audience tonight. Thank you very much. And before I go, I want to thank the Supremes, really, because you three beautiful women, and listen, I mean, I know I didn't get everybody's questions, and I know what usually happens is you walk out the door and you go, you know, so please, I hope you feel that this is your house, and please come back again. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep prodding. We're gonna keep opening doors. We're just gonna keep going. And now, y'all, as we say on the South Side of Chicago, we playing out with Angelique Kidjo doing her rendition of Talking Heads, Once in a Lifetime. Thank you all very, very much.